see my slide?
I can see you.
And if for some reason you can't hear me at some point, I sent you my telephone number just in case.
Oh, okay,
So,
great.
it's in your email just in case you need it.
Fantastic.
All right.
I'm going to go look for that real quick while I'm waiting. Okay.
I'm just going to give it another minute before I get started. If anyone's here, you can go ahead and say hello in the chat. Not that I can see it right this second, but I will see it shortly. Oh yeah, I see it. This looks like 6 people are in the room.
Excellent.
I can see that, but I can't see what they're saying at the moment. So welcome everyone to our session. We're going to get started here in about 1 minute. We're going to give people the time to just get settled in here before we get into our sticky learning by design. Hopefully you're all having better weather than we are. Although I guess if you're from, did you say you're from Oregon?
Yes.
Okay. Do you get a lot of rain over there? Because we've had the rainiest year of my life.
Yeah, it's been pretty dry actually up until now. And all of a sudden this week, tons of rain. It's ridiculous.
Oh, okay. Well, I understand. We've had it since about June or July. It's been crazy. But anyway, welcome to the EdTech Coaches Network's monthly webinar. Just want to take a moment to share our leadership team. Pam Shoemaker is our president. And tonight you'll be hearing Melissa Henning's actually helping to moderate this webinar tonight. These are all of our leadership team. You can follow us on Twitter. There's all of our handles. And speaking of that, we're going to be talking in a moment about Twitter chats. If you're interested in hosting a Twitter chat or moderating a Twitter chat, you can contact me at Mrs. M. Henning. We're always looking for new folks to jump in there and moderate a Twitter chat. It's the final Tuesday of every month at both 1 and 8 p.m. Eastern Time. And again, that would be the Mrs. M. Henning on Twitter. All right, if you want to connect with us, we have all of these different areas here to connect with. I'm not going to go through them all, but we have quite a few. A good place to start is by joining the PLN. If you haven't joined, this is a great opportunity. It's free to join the ISTE PLN in the community. In the community, you can see we have discussions, library, blogs, events going on, and this is where you find the archived Twitter chats and the announcements for new Twitter chats coming up and all of that jazz. Some of the other ways you can get connected besides the Twitter chats, which we already talked about, you do have book studies that will be starting soon. We use a slow chat method where only 1 question is posted per day. You can reply anytime throughout that day. It's a really manageable way to conduct a book study. We also have Playground webinar series. After each ISTE conference, we start a new Playground webinar series, and we feature conference Playground presentations that we find to be stellar from the June before. That's what you're attending tonight. Our hope is that even if you're not able to attend the conference in person, you are able to attend the webinar series during the school year to see some of these selected Playground presentations, kind of the best of the best. We also have blogging buddies inspired by Jennifer Hogan's Compelled Blogger Tribe. For more information, there's a link there. You can check out blogging buddies. We have a local conference meetup kit. If you are going to be presenting at any of the ISTE affiliates throughout the country and would like to have a conference meetup kit available for you. We do have one already ready to go. And we also have ISTE refresh events. As ISTE refreshes their standards, we typically do host events to try to help you and get your input about these new standards. We're going through the Playground webinar series. As I said, that we're basically the stellar sessions during our Playground last year at ISTE. And you can see we're kind of towards the middle. We had September, October, November, and tonight we are on Sticky Learning by Design. How design thinking frameworks can dramatically boost learning. So without further ado, I would like to present our presenter, Alyssa Tormala. And to tell you a little bit about our presenter, first of all, she's the Vice Principal of Professional Development and Innovation at Jesuit High School in Portland, Oregon. She's an Apple Distinguished Educator and Microsoft Innovative Educator. She's fascinated by how technology can open the door to innovation in teaching and learning. She frequently speaks at regional and national conferences like ISTE about all the ways technology can enhance, inspire, and expand learning for students of all ages. Prior to joining Jesuit High School, she served as a teacher and instructional technology coach for 11 years at St. Mary's Academy in Portland, Oregon, where she helped launch a one-to-one iPad program. She spearheaded the development of a computer science program designed specifically for young women, and she led the school to become the first Apple Distinguished High School in Portland. Outside her work, Alyssa enjoys spending time with her husband, her daughter, dog, cat, and 5 horses. So without further ado, I'm going to come back to you guys and switch over so Alyssa can get started here.
All right. Hello, everybody. I'm about to screen share my slides, but I just wanted to say hello from Portland, Oregon. Yes, it is raining here, but surprisingly, not as much as you would think. So give me just a second as I get my screen going. And I know you're getting the weird effect that it always has. All right, so here we are, ready to go. Sticky Learning by Design. This was, as you heard, a presentation that I did at the Playground last summer at ISTE and just had a ball. I'm just going to give you a little bit of background. You heard from my biography that I'm currently the Vice Principal of Professional Development and Innovation at Jesuit High School in Portland, but I was at St. Mary's Academy for the last 11 years. And yet my journey getting there was an interesting journey. I originally got my degrees in English and journalism and then went to law school and then practiced law for about just under 7 years before I made the decision to move into education. And that really was because I was fascinated by the way that people learned. I certainly never expected to end up in technology. You know, at the time that I became a teacher, I was an English and social science teacher, and I thought that's kind of where I was going to land forever. But when the iPad came about and St. Mary's decided to start using the iPads in the classroom, I was fascinated. And that began a journey that I never would have anticipated, that ultimately resulted in me becoming the instructional technology coach and also moving into the technology department, and I was teaching classes in that department. So that's really where this concept of sticky learning by design had its beginnings. I actually had never heard of design thinking theory until we had a consultant come to St. Mary's and work with a number of us on design thinking, and I was fascinated by the concept. So with that in mind, I'm going to tonight talk about a story of how design thinking helped me transform learning in the classroom. The situation was that a couple of years ago, as I was teaching technology classes, we decided to create this new technology class for freshmen. St. Mary's Academy was a 9th through 12th grade high school environment for all girls. And we were noticing that even though we had one-to-one environment with iPads and our students did have some level of experience with technology as they came into the school, it was completely varied. We never knew whether they were going to come in with a high level of experience or a low level. Some of them had a lot of experience with Google, but none in the Apple environment, and vice versa. So giving them the opportunity to build those skills turned out to be a real need. And several of us got together and developed this technology foundations course that we ended up creating for all incoming freshmen. It was a semester-long course. It was designed to both onboard the students with some of the technology that they needed to know for school, but also to introduce them to a number of skills for the 21st century learner. Things like collaborative problem solving and being able to troubleshoot different programs and basic computational thinking and coding, introduction to robotics. So over the course of that semester, we hit on a number of different skills and ideas. And the class was really designed to be project-based. So when it came down to designing the final assessment for the class, the semester exam, it didn't really feel like a traditional exam would mix in with what we had designed. It just didn't make a lot of sense. And we really wanted to be able to assess whether or not those 21st century skills had been learned over the course of that semester. So what we came up with was this, an app design challenge. We asked our students, we issued them this challenge: design an app that will help your fellow students be more mindful about technology use. Now, let me back up just for context here. First, the students were not yet ready to actually code a whole app. So we weren't asking them to do the background coding. We were asking them to do the front end design of the app concept. And the reason we chose mindfulness was that in our school at the time, the concept of mindfulness was a real hot topic. Students were debating and conversing in hallways about how they could balance their technology use with getting their homework done and social skills and all of this. And it seemed like this would be a really relevant way to ask them to build some project. So we issued them this challenge, and we gave them about 4 to 4.5 weeks of the end of the semester to go through the process. Now, for those of you who are not familiar yet with the design thinking process, I'm going to go over those frameworks in just a moment. But the goals of our assessment were to show whether or not the students could gather and analyze data, whether they could engage their empathy skills. In other words, could they understand the perspective of others? Whether they could work collaboratively to solve a challenge, whether they could design a creative solution to that challenge. And then at the end of the whole project, they were going to be asked to present professionally the solution that they had designed. And we asked them to get into groups of 2 or 3. So they were very small groups at the beginning of this project. The models that we used to both approach designing the class overall and then also to have our students approach the design project were a combination of these 2 models. The first is the Stanford Design School model, which is a pretty prominent one. A lot of people have seen it. Many of you probably have as well. And the second was the model by the Institute for Innovation in Education, which is from the University of Michigan. The 2 models are similar in that they have similar stages to them. They approach each of those stages in a slightly different way, but the general concepts are the same. And we used sort of a conglomeration of these 2 models to teach our students about the stages of design and to walk them through the process as we went. I want to put a plug in here for design thinking in general, because I'm going to talk a little bit at the end about why it can be so important, not just in a specific class, but in a general educational concept. Because the beauty of design thinking is that the end product is never the point. It's the journey that you take to get there. And the purpose of design is that you continuously take that journey. You keep going through that cycle. You're never really fully satisfied with the final product because you're always trying to test and revise and redo that protocol or that project or that product that you've created. And the beauty of that is that you get really used to getting feedback. You get really used to not always getting things right, to not always being perfect. And in today's age, that seems to be something that our students really need, especially in the increase in anxiety and stress levels that we see going on. So bringing in this design thinking not only helps them develop some of those 21st century skills that we're always going after, collaborative thinking and creativity and critical thinking and all of that, but I think it also really helps them rethink how they approach life a little bit, and for our colleagues as well. So in any case, these are the models we used. And and then we just kind of kickstarted into the project. So I'm going to walk you through how we went through each of these stages. In the first stage, during empathy and data gathering, the students did personal logs for about 3.5 weeks where they tracked their own individual use of technology throughout the day. So they kept track of how many times they were getting notifications, or how they were using their devices during homework, how long it took them to do their homework, how much sleep they were getting, whether or not they were getting notifications or interruptions of their sleep because of their devices, where they put their devices. So we tried to think of as many questions as we possibly could, and the students individually gathered data through their logs. Each week, they then brought those logs to class and dumped that data into class-wide surveys. And since the entire freshman class was doing this project through all of our Technology Foundations classes, the students then ended up with an aggregate pool of data of around 200 different pieces of information for each of those questions per week. So it's a lot of great data. In addition, we asked each of the groups to go out and interview students in the sophomore, junior, and senior classes. The students were required to interview at least one person in each of those classes per student. So each group would end up with at least several interviews from each class. The reason for that was we wanted to have them get a perspective outside of the freshman experience, but we also wanted them to engage face-to-face with people and work on those empathy building skills in those face-to-face interviews. We did give them some structure and framework about the kinds of questions to ask, but it was really up to them to do that. Ultimately, they pulled all that data together, analyzed it, and used that data to then develop a user profile. So they created a fictional person in each group that had a bunch of criteria and a bunch of background and a profile, essentially. And then the goal was to design an app for that fictional user. This is all part of the design process, and they really of what that looks like. We pulled from the Stanford Design School model for a number of the activities we used here. And I've got to put in a big plug for the Stanford Design School. They do a great job providing resources that are free of use, and they're continually updating those resources. So if you're looking for materials and you've never done design thinking or design projects before, the Stanford Design School website is perfect for that. You don't have to be an expert. You can be a complete beginner and you'll have everything you need. The picture on the left is one of the activities where using sticky notes, the students do sort of a brain dump of all the information or ideas that they got from their data analysis. And then they categorize all of those ideas into groups and then do some prioritizing on which pieces they want to focus on for purposes of developing a prototype. Once they've done that, then they start to develop the actual design. And of course, they have to keep going back to the user profile and to the information they gathered to ensure that their design actually meets the needs of their user. And on the picture on the right, you can see that some of them sketched this out on paper. Some of them sketched it out on iPads. They were given, complete choice on how they wanted to do this. Then the next stage was to develop a prototype. Now, again, we gave them full opportunity, full creative license to use any tool that they want. Some of them did choose to use online wireframing tools that allow you to create an app design concept, but most of them actually used Keynote, which a lot of people think is just a presentation software, but in fact, because of some of its functions, it can be used really easily to create a wireframe, which is essentially a storyboard for an app. Now, I'm going to take you through just a couple slides of an example of one of these, but these three images that you see on the screen right here are three of the apps that were developed by students in my class. And as you can see, they had a lot of fun developing the icons that they would use for those apps and the names of the apps and the color palettes. They really went all out. And I'll say right now, the students blew us away. It was myself and two other teachers running this class, and we could not believe how engaged and how excited the students were, and then the quality of the final products was just amazing. So just for an example, let me take you through a couple of slides from Smile, which the students even gave a little extra title to, the app that smiles back. And remember that these apps were designed to help develop mindfulness with technology use. So the first thing they did in their presentations at the end of the term was go through their data analysis process. And this particular group chose to do that by pulling comments that were part of the surveys and the interviews that they did. And they talked through what those pieces were that they pulled from for their design. And then they talked through their user profile. And as you can see here, the students got really creative and actually drew an avatar based on their user profile, who they named Blair Smith. This is the home screen of the app that they designed. And the reason I put this in Keynote for you is, as you can see on the screen, my cursor, when it moves over the word work, there are links inside each of these slides that when you press on that link, it takes you to another slide, which makes it feel like an app. And that was kind of the idea, was that they create a wireframe that gave a simulated experience of an app. So as you can see, they thought about the profile, work mode. This particular app was designed to create opportunities for mindfulness as well as organization. One of the things I love about this app as well was that the students came up with the idea of an avatar that could be customized. So each user could create their own avatar, and as they built up points for doing their tasks and doing mindfulness activities, they could add new elements to their avatar. So they really were being thoughtful about how teenagers and how young people use technology at this point. Really cool little app design. So at the end of all of this, once they had presented, the question, of course, was, did we meet our goals? And I would say 100% between all three of the teachers and all the students across the 9th grade class, we absolutely met those goals that I talked about. They demonstrated that they could gather and analyze data. They demonstrated empathy skills and absolutely demonstrated growth in those skills. They demonstrated that they could work collaboratively together in their small groups to solve a challenge. They did amazing creative design work. And then they all presented very professionally. And presentation skills had been one of those pieces of the class. So being able to see them get up at the end of the semester and demonstrate the skills they had learned across the class about presentation and slide design and all of that was really amazing. The other piece that was sort of a shock and surprise to us as teachers was, this seems like it's a lot of work. This seems like, it's going to eat up a ton of time. And the reality was that it was actually a lot easier as a teacher to do something like this than to try to create some kind of test or project that happened outside of class that students would have to be sort of governed about. We did most of the work for this project in class. We purposefully built in class time for it. Very little of the work was done outside of class. And that meant, as a teacher, we spent most of our class time wandering through the room and sitting down with different groups of kids, watching what they were doing, asking questions, listening in on conversations, kind of guiding them when needed, brainstorming with them when they wanted that. And it was super easy to measure whether or not they understood the content and the skills that this particular project was asking of them. And then with the end presentations, we had already done most of the measurement by that point. So it was really just one last piece that we needed to measure. So if you're looking at a way to reduce your grading, ironically, this was one of those ways. Definitely one of those situations where students worked harder than the teacher, and that's really what we want from them. And of course, the icing on the cake was absolutely that the students loved what they were doing. They were engaged, they were working with each other, and they were completely on task the entire time. In fact, many of them were coming in early or leaving class late because they were so excited about their projects. So what were some of our takeaways? If we were to give any advice about doing these kinds of projects in other classes, and again, this could be done in any content area with really any age group. You could just tweak the expectations for younger audience if you needed to. Our main takeaways were that a design project like this works best when you are trying to measure skills, because that's what they are putting their hands into and what they're doing. It could certainly be done with something that is more content-based, but there should be some aspect of a skill that you need them to both practice, demonstrate, and then measure. We also would highly recommend that you keep it to 2 or 3 person teams. There's some research out there that says collaboration works best in very small groups, in 2 to 3 person groups, because every person in that group therefore has a voice. And it ensures that regardless of learning style or introversion versus extroversion, every member of that group is going to be someone who contributes actively to the conversations and to the work. Larger groups ultimately result in somebody either being left out or somebody not getting the work done. This was also a great example of how technology and content can be interwoven very organically. That is one of the big challenges, of course, in technology integration. You know, at first, when all these devices came out, a lot of people just kind of threw them into the classroom and wanted to see what would happen and didn't really have a lot of thought process around what you were going to do with the technology. It was technology for technology's sake. A situation like this is really one where it was the pedagogy first. It was the strategy and the mindset first. And then we brought in the technology as it made sense to do so. And by giving students a lot of choice in how they incorporated technology and creativity, we ensured that the students were going to use it effectively. We definitely recommend that if you do a design challenge, it be based on a real life issue or question or concept that students can relate to. In this case, the concept of mindfulness was something that really drew them in. They felt like they were solving a real problem for themselves, and it was something that was directly relatable to them. Doing a design challenge on something that doesn't really seem real or doesn't seem relatable is probably going to fall a little flat. So if you do this, we definitely recommend real life challenges. As I said before, the best way you do this is to have a lot of in-class time. That is where you can see as a teacher the learning happening. You can measure and assess whether or not the skills are being understood and practiced. It's a lot easier to do that than to try to have the students do some kind of deliverable outside of class and give that to you. It's also a lot easier on the students, and quite frankly, a more equitable way to address learning, especially in group-related projects. You just don't know all the time what resources your students are going to have outside of the classroom, whether it's a technology issue or a transportation issue or a communication issue or an economic issue. And giving students the opportunity to work together in class to do the bulk of the work is going to ensure that there's a more equitable deliverable, a more equitable outcome. And finally, one thing we did learn that we made a bit of a mistake on in this is we didn't give enough instruction up front about data gathering and analysis. We made some assumptions that our students would be able to understand the data they were gathering, and it turned out that we needed to give them a little bit more background and structure on how to read surveys, how to look for trends, how to take those data points and apply them to design. Once we figured that out, we built some in, but we highly recommend if you're doing any kind of work with survey or interview data in a project that you do some instruction with your students. But of course, I would say that the biggest takeaway I had from this entire project was that project-based learning absolutely works. Yes, this was an assessment. It was a final exam, quote unquote, if you will, and it served for that purpose in their grades. But the learning that happened during this process was worth more than anything. And I think in the end, the students could care less about the grade because they knew that they had learned something and they knew they had demonstrated a level of skill that they didn't have at the beginning of the semester. And it was easily visible to everyone in that class. The pride that our students had when they walked out of the room was worth more than gold. So highly recommend project-based learning where you can fit it into your curriculum. One of the things I wanted to kind of come back around to before I finish up is looking at applications of this beyond a class like a technology class. The thing I worry about a little bit in doing a presentation like this is that by telling this story, people might think that a design project like this could only work in a class that was all project-based, or in a technology class, or in a one-off class. And really, I want to get the message across that design thinking applies in so many different ways and can be pulled into so many different aspects of education. So just for some examples, with students, You could do design thinking in a larger or smaller context when you are exploring a topic. It doesn't have to be an assessment, and it doesn't even have to really have a deliverable, as long as the students are designing something. So they could be designing around a question. It could turn into a research inquiry-based project, where their final, quote, product is really more the research that they've done and the understanding that they've reached. Certainly, it could be done in a smaller scale for a unit assessment, especially if your unit is involving some level of skill. And of course, it makes perfect sense for something like a senior capstone project or an independent study class. Design thinking projects or design challenges can absolutely be done on an individual basis. They don't have to be in a small group. That collaborative work that a group does is often where some of the best inspiration comes from, but you can find ways for independent students to collaborate with others as part of a larger design project. In my role right now as a vice principal, of course, I've been thinking a lot about how these kinds of concepts could apply from the perspective of faculty and colleagues. And, so a couple of examples I've come up with are, for instance, topic exploration by faculty. Let's say you have a department who's looking at whether or not to design a new class, or whether or not they should change the focus of the department's curriculum. Just exploring that topic could use the design process as a framework. Certainly committee work, if there is a committee working to design something. For instance, in our school right now, we have a committee working on whether or not we should change our bell schedule. And as part of that work, they're coming up with several different models of bell schedules that they think might fit our particular community. Well, that is a design process. It absolutely is. And being able to use a framework like the Stanford Design School model or another model as the way to frame that work gives everyone a place to start and a place to go through the process, and can really make it very meaningful. Curriculum design, of course, whether or not you're doing it as an individual or as a department, this framework lends itself perfectly to that. And then if you have small group professional development, such as PLC or a teacher research group, this can be a really great model to use for that kind of work. I wouldn't really recommend doing a design challenge with a really large group of people, or using the design framework with a really large group of people who are trying to design something. That tends not to work as well. It gets a little bit too overwhelming. So I would definitely recommend keeping it to smaller groups, anywhere from 2 to 4 or 5, maybe 6 at the most. But I think the biggest piece that we can take from design thinking into education in general and into our work as educators is that the design thinking mindset, as I mentioned earlier, is one that can be incredibly beneficial to students and to teachers both. One of the things I've encountered as a vice principal and as a technology coach, someone who works with faculty a lot, is I've discovered that we as educators have a tendency to hold ourselves to this really, really high standard. A lot of times we're perfectionists. We have a high expectation of ourselves about getting things right, or being the expert, or being the knower in the room, and having the perfect lesson. And we tend to really kick ourselves hard when things don't go well, or when a lesson bombs, or when a student doesn't understand something, or we get a complaint from someone, or we get feedback that wasn't super positive. And I think that it can be a real challenge as an educator to be innovative and to continue to be excited and inspired by our work over the course of many years if we can't give ourselves a break. So using the design model and incorporating it into our daily lives can really help us rewire our brains a little bit and help us see the process of learning or design work as teachers, because we're, as educators, we're designing all the time. It's a constant part of what we do. But to be able to see that from the perspective of being a journey and an adventure, rather than always worrying about what the final product is and whether or not people are going to like it, can be hugely motivating. And it can really take a huge weight off of our shoulders. We don't have to be perfect all the time. We don't have to create the perfect final product. The lesson we create the first time around doesn't have to always work. if we approach it from a design thinking mindset, we know that the first times we do something, or the second or the third or the fourth time, we're going to have to shift it. We're going to get some feedback, or we're going to see something in the way that we are doing that lesson or that curriculum or that project that needs shifting. And if we can approach it from the perspective of that's normal, and it doesn't mean that I am somehow wrong or imperfect or bad as an educator because my lesson didn't work, it can be a huge relief. And it means that we give ourselves the freedom to be more creative and to be more excited about the work we're doing. And that keeps the energy flowing over the course of years. So I would highly recommend that any of you out there who haven't encountered the design model or haven't used it or haven't really done a lot of reading on it, please go check it out. Start to incorporate it into what you do in little ways or big ways if you wish, because it helps you shift your mindset in your own work, and it can help you then model that shift for your students. So with that, I am basically at the end of my presentation. I did want to tell you, for those of you who would like a little bit more information about the project or some more details about how it worked, I wrote an article for Edutopia about this. It's called Finding the Right Balance in Tech Use. If you scan the QR code on your screen, it should take you right to that article. Or you can go to the Edutopia website and not Google it, but search it on the Edutopia website. If you'd like to connect with me through Twitter, my handle is on the screen. I would absolutely love to connect with you. And my email address is on the screen as well, and I'd be more than happy to answer questions or follow up with people by email if they would like to. So with that, I would love to know if there are any questions out there. Anybody want to know a little bit more or have some details they'd like to learn about?
Thank you, Alyssa. The only question we have right now, which you've kind of already addressed, was if you had some links that you could share. So I would assume what you shared would already address that. If you have any additional links, feel free.
Absolutely. And I can also recommend a couple of other resources if people are interested. One of my favorites are John Spencer and AJ Giuliani. They have a couple of books called Launch and Empower. You can find those on Amazon. They also have some great blogs that incorporate some of those elements. Launch in particular, their first book, is focused around using design thinking to boost creativity. And they do a great job of really laying it out to make it easy to use. So I would highly recommend those as resources.
Okay, and if anyone has any other questions, you can go ahead and put those in the chat. I am watching that. You have lots of positive feedback here, Alyssa. Just mainly great job and excellent information. But I will wait just a minute before I go to closing slides and make sure that no one has a question that's coming into the chat. Okay, could you please repeat the authors, Alyssa?
Repeat the authors: John Spencer and AJ Giuliani.
Thank you. Okay, that was inspiring. I'm already thinking of design-based projects for my classroom. Great, Colleen. Okay, I don't think there's any more questions, but I'll just wait a few more seconds here, just in case anyone's typing anything in.
Great. And two, if anyone thinks of questions later, again, feel free to contact me either through Twitter or email. I love to be able to connect with people. So it's one of the best parts of being part of this PLN and being part of the ISTE organization in general. You know, we don't have to be isolated where we are. We can connect outside of our walls.
Okay, and I love the idea of using this with PD small groups. Thanks for the info. Thank you, Julie, for the feedback. And Robin just says thank you in general to you there, Alyssa.
Thank you.
Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and switch over. If any other questions come in, I will let you know, Alyssa, and I'll go ahead and switch over to my screen, which will be nice and pretty and give you guys dizziness for a moment while we switch. And just do some closing out information for you. To get your contact hour for participating in this webinar tonight and for feedback, you want to go to bit.ly/etc webinar feedback, and that will give you your hour that you can turn in for your PD credit, and also that's where the feedback can be found. So I'll leave that here so you can get that bit.ly down. ETC webinar feedback. And it looks like you may get out of here a little bit before an hour, so that's good. And coming up next month on February 19th, we have our next ETC Playground webinar series, which is Inclusivity with Kelsey Pacer. If you'd like to register, you go to bit.ly/ISTE ETC webinars. Same way you registered for tonight's session. Hopefully we'll see some of you back on February 19th. Again, that's bit.ly/ISTE ETC webinars. So I'll see if anyone else has any questions. Otherwise, I'm going to come on back to our room and just see if there's any closing things going out before I stop broadcasting. And thank you, Alyssa, for all the wonderful information.
Thank you. It was fun.
I don't see anything else coming in. So with that, I guess we will say good night and enjoy the rest of your week. Stay dry and warm wherever you're at. I saw someone else was in Pennsylvania. It's nicknamed now Pennsylvania. All the rain we've had lately. Yes, it's crazy here. But okay, well, have a great night, everyone. I don't see anything else coming in, so I'm going to stop broadcasting and end this webinar. Thanks again, Alyssa. Have a great night. Bye-bye.